seminal works about social change, political theory, and strategy. And so all the major social movements have been inspired by him. And for our purposes, I'm just going to talk about one idea that he defined. He calls it cultural hegemony. And what he did is he found that the ruling class, the dominant class, creates the illusion of normalcy by manipulating culture. He calls cultural hegemony the domination and manipulation of a society's norms, habits, customs, values, and beliefs through propaganda. And this is propaganda that promotes the dominant class as the normal. He also shows that how important propaganda is as a tool for controlling the public mind under fascism and other totalitarian states. So he was one of the first people to really identify this trend. And then an interesting thing was happening in the United States around the same time. A man named Edward L. Bernays published a book in 1928 called Propaganda. And at the time, the word propaganda didn't have the stigma and the negative connotations that it has today. But then something really interesting happened. Goebbels, who was the head of the Ministry of Propaganda under the Nazi Germany, had a fascination with this book. And that was an embarrassment for him. So what he did is he stopped referring to propaganda and he started calling it public relations. And so that's kind of how marketing was born. Now the book, the thrust of the book, the theme of the book is how, even under free democratic states, the public must be, the public mind must be controlled in order to maintain social order. Okay, so around this time with Gramsci, in Gramsci's age, what would cultural hegemony look like? What would an example perhaps look like? Well, one infamous example was the euthanasia or mercy killing program, where the Nazis showed children, concentration camp children, well-dressed, clothed, nicely clothed, singing patriotic songs. The camp was cleaned up. And this was all staged for the international press, an international press conference, because this was the side of the Holocaust that the Nazis wanted the world to see, when of course, the fact was obviously what we see on the right. Now, there's a very striking parallel, I would say, with what's happening today in animal agriculture, with the use of humane washing. So they like to show us pretty pictures of happy family farmers, like this one, holding their animals lovingly, and telling us feel-good stories about how the animals are willing and happy to be on the farm and to give their milk or whatever it is they're providing. But the fact is that these animals' lives are being drastically and violently cut short, and in their adolescence or even infancy, and they're being turned into profitable commodities. So let me just clarify that the example, the analogy I'm making here is not about the victims, but actually about the method of propaganda that's being used. In both cases, propaganda is concealing institutionalized violence and oppression of an inferior group that is, quote-unquote, sacrificed for the benefit of some superior group. And now bringing this up to current times, Noam Chomsky, in his seminal work, Manufacturing Consent, wrote, "Propaganda is to democracy what a bludgeon is to a totalitarian state." Now isn't that interesting? Because Gramsci said that propaganda was a tool of totalitarian states. And Chomsky's now saying that even free democratic states also use propaganda to their benefit as well. And Chris Hedges, Pulitzer Prize-winning former New York Times journalist, wrote in his book Empire of Illusion, which I highly recommend to anyone who's interested in him. He wrote, "A culture that cannot distinguish between reality and illusion dies." So let's just talk a little bit about propaganda and what it protects. I'm going to just throw out three stats just to give you a sense of how valuable the assets are of animal agriculture. The first is that the U.S. meat industry is worth at least $154 or $155 billion annually. Cargill, which is one of the largest players in animal agriculture worldwide, spent about $1,792 million just on promoting animal products to consumers. That's not their profit. That's just what they spend on advertising and marketing and all that crap. And the USDA, which has an interesting kind of conflict of interest built into it, that it, on the one hand it provides dietary guidelines for Americans, on the other hand it's the marketing wing of animal agriculture. In 2013, basically gave the industry $1,332 million just for marketing assistance alone. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the samples of the fictions that I've been referring to all this time. And I'm going to start out with some what I call foundational fictions, because these are the most important ones that others are often built on. And the first one is what I call consent. And the example I'm using here is an iconic depiction of Krishna, Lord Krishna milking the sacred cow. And as you can see, it's a very benevolent, peaceful scene. The cows willingly give Krishna the milk, just like she would her young. And her young look very happy, so you know, it looks like a very happy, pleasant scene. And bringing that up to modern times, the packaging of organic belly milk replaces Krishna with the compassionate, benevolent family farmer and his family, shown here compassionately petting their cows. So what's real interesting in my research about consent, because it's such an important concept in so many cultures, is that this story started emerging as we started domesticating animals. In other words, it was kind of a response to the violence in capturing and confinement and use of animals as property, that whole evolution in human history. Also the story of consent, rather than taking, rather than being a perpetrator, where actually they're giving something to us. That was a story that comes about at that time. So the language is very important too. We never say that we take from animals. We never say we take their milk. We always say that they give us their milk, their eggs, their bodies, their lives. And that's a very important distinction between giving and taking, because of course taking is stealing. Excuse me. So a second foundational fiction is what I call objectification. And it's basically the process of turning animals into objects. So I use this example because it's striking in how the bottle cap remover is designed. Just like the piece of machinery that debeaks, I call it amputation, but the industry calls it debeaking because it sounds more pleasant. Notice how similar that design is, but also notice how similar the handling is. The hand with the beer bottle and the hand on the chick is very, very similar.